Hi, welcome back to Joe Blogs. In today's episode, I want to talk to you about savings and specifically how much you should be putting aside at each of the different stages of your life in your 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s and 60s. But before we get started on all of that, the purpose of this video isn't to make you feel bad. So I don't want to go through the numbers and you look at the figures and think, well, I don't have that amount in my savings, therefore I'm not where I should be and now I'm feeling a bit depressed and I don't want to carry on watching this video. I'm going to watch one of animals or something fun. The whole point of this is really to act as a wake-up call to make sure that you're thinking about savings. And the fact that you're actually watching this video right now tells me that it's something that's on your mind, you're thinking about it. And the more you think about it, the more likely you are to actually do something about it. So the point of this video really is to talk about what the recommendation is in terms of what you should have at each of those different age levels, but also to talk about the concept of compounding, because the earlier that you start investing, the more your investments will grow. If you can invest in your 20s or 30s or 40s, those investments will be worth a lot more by the time you retire than the investments that you make in your 50s or 60s. And if you're sitting in your 50s, 60s, 70s or 80s watching this, then maybe you're thinking about your children or your grandchildren or a relative or something like that. But the concept is still the same. The earlier you start investing, the better, because that means that your pot can get bigger and bigger. And when I'm talking about savings in today's video, I'm talking about absolutely everything that you've got your money in. So that might be a savings account, just a very basic savings account where you're earning some interest. It could be your checking account where you're just building up a large amount of cash and you're not getting any interest. And if you are, then that's insane. Or it could be you've invested some money into the stock markets on your own account, or it could be your pension fund or your 401k, whatever it is. It's all of the money that you've tucked away for the future. That's what I'm calling savings. It's not just what's in your savings account. So let's get started by talking about that concept of compounding. But before we do that, can I ask you to subscribe? Because whenever I make a video like this, I suddenly get hit with a whole wave of unsubscriptions. People who've been watching my other videos decide that this is quite insulting. They don't want to watch anything talking about finance or savings or the future. And so they hit that unsubscribe button. So I actually go backwards every time I make a video like this. So if you're watching it and you're not a subscriber and you are interested in these sort of videos, please hit that subscribe button and that will make me make more videos like this. So let's get started by talking about compounding. The concept of compound growth is something that's really important when looking at how early you should start saving for your retirement or the future. And just to go through a very simple example, if you've got $100 and you had a bank account that was paying you a 10% interest, you could put that $100 in on day one, and at the end of that first year, you would receive 10% interest. So that would be $10 against the $100 that you initially put into the account. So then your balance becomes $110. And if you're still being paid 10% interest, that means that at the end of year 2, you would be paid 10% of $110, which is $11. So you got $10 in the first year and $11 in the second year, but the interest rate hasn't changed. The reason why you got an additional dollar was because your balance increased from 100 to 110. So at the end of year 2, your balance would be $121. If you then get paid 10% interest on that $121, then you would earn $12.10 in year 3. And that really explains the concept of compound growth. Basically, if you leave your investments to grow and you reinvest everything that you're making from those investments, that means that your pot is getting bigger, and therefore as the pot grows, you earn more capital. And the reason why this is important when we're talking about long-term investing is that the markets over the long term generate significant returns. This chart shows the compound annual growth rate of the S&P 500, which are the 500 largest companies in the USA, dating back to 1992. And what this chart shows is that over the last 32 years, the S&P 500 has grown at a compound annual growth rate of 10.98%, and that's just under 11%. And the concept that we've just discussed of compound growth means that if you'd have invested $10,000 at the start of 1992, by July 2024, that initial $10,000 investment would be worth $294,982. So that's an increase over that 32-year period of over 29 times. And that really shows you why you need to start investing early, because the compound growth, the year-on-year growth as your capital starts to increase, really boosts the amount that you've got in your pot. And therefore, when you come to actually start spending it, you'll have a lot more if you've started earlier. And I wanted to make that point before we start talking about how much you're recommended to have saved at each stage in your life. Because even if you're behind the numbers that we're going to talk about, if you start today, then that compounding will start immediately. And by the time you get to the point when you want to spend it, whether it be in 10 years or 15 or 20 or 30 or hopefully even longer, the pot that you build up could be absolutely huge, but you need to start today. Okay, so how much should you be saving in your 20s? Well, the figures that we're going to talk about in today's video have been proposed by Fidelity, which is one of the largest fund managers in the world. They've got assets under management and administration of over $19 trillion. So they know a thing or two about managing funds and how much people should have in terms of their retirement. Now, interestingly, Fidelity haven't actually given a recommendation for somebody in their 20s. And I think there are multiple reasons for that. Firstly, you're generally coming out of college, so you'll be finding your first job. You've probably built up some student debt, maybe some other debt. It's a very expensive part of your life because you're starting out on the road to employment. You start having to go out having dinners and lunch and spending money, and it's nice to have some money in your pocket, but that money tends to go quite quickly. And also, you don't start on an amazing salary. You start on some sort of starter salary and then build your salary up as you start to build up your skills. You get better, you might get a promotion, a pay raise, maybe a bonus, maybe this, maybe that. So in your 20s, it's really about starting to manage yourself, manage your finances. And if you can save anything at all, then I think that's a real bonus. Certainly in the early part of your 20s, up to 25, you should be having a good time. Maybe if you could put away $50 a month or $50 a week, then that would be incredible because of the compounding that we just talked about. But in reality, for most of us in their 20s, we're not going to be saving a lot of money. Maybe if you've got some parents who are looking to help you out and maybe want to put some money aside for you, or grandparents, or you might inherit some money, that's a real bonus. But I think realistically, for the vast majority of us, saving in our 20s is a real challenge. But Fidelity do say that by the time you're 30, so at the end of your 20s, you should have put aside 1 times your annual salary. So let's make an assumption that your salary is $50,000. And obviously that's quite a decent salary for somebody in their 20s. So that would mean by the time you're 30, you should have put aside $50,000. And that would be either building up in your pension fund. So that could be through the company pension that you've got. You might get 5 or 6% contributed to your pension each year by your employer. So you can have a look and see how much has been built up in that pot. It might be some savings that you've put to one side or something else. But the recommendation is that by the time you hit 30, you should have saved 1 times your annual salary. Now in your 30s, it's assumed that you've started to take stock, you're now in control of all of your finances, and that you are genuinely starting to prepare for the future. And Fidelity's recommendation is that by the time you're 35, you should have 2 times your annual salary. So if we stick with the $50,000 that we've just talked about, that would be total savings put aside of $100,000 by the time you are 35. Now that's obviously quite a big number. And if you're on a bigger salary, obviously it will be a bigger amount. If you're on a smaller salary, it will be less. But 2 times your salary is what they're recommending. And then by the time you're 40, at the end of your 30s, Fidelity recommend that you should have 3 times your annual salary put aside. So that would be $150,000 in the example that we just looked at. Now, these are obviously big numbers, and you might be starting to get a bit depressed. As I said at the start of the video, the point of this video isn't to make you feel bad. It's actually just to explain to you what you should be doing. But in order to make you feel a little bit better, let's go back and have a look at a worked example of the benefit of compounding on your savings. So let's assume that you're in a position to be able to save $100 per week, which would equate to roughly $400 per month. So if we say your initial contribution is $400 and you continue to put away $400 every single month as part of your savings plan. And if we assume that you invest that money into the S&P 500, as we talked about earlier, the average growth over the last 30 years has been almost 11%. But if we assume growth of 10%, then over a 10-year period, that $400 per month will grow to a total of $83,021. And if we look at the breakdown of that, by the end of that 10 years, you've made contributions of $48,000 and you've got growth of $34,621. However, if we add another 5 years onto this chart to show the benefit of compounding, you can see that in 15 years, that $400 per month has grown to $167,570. And we've now got more compound growth, $95,170, compared to the contributions of $72,000. If we now add another 5 years to push it out to 20 years, you can see that that $400 per month has grown to $306,679, with over 2/3 of that amount, $210,000, coming from the growth and $96,000 coming from your contributions. If we increase the period to 25 years, you can see that the amount has gone up to $535,556, and of that amount, $415,156 has come from the growth. And if we push this out to 30 years, you can see that $400 per month, $100 per week, grows to $912,130. And of that figure, $767,730 comes from the growth. And if you can increase that contribution to $500, then the total balance at the end of 30 years would be more than $1.1 million. If you could push the amount to $600 per month, then you'd be sitting on over $1.36 million, and contributions of $700 would grow to almost $1.6 million. So I wanted to make that point at this stage in the video, really to highlight the fact that the earlier that you start your investing, the better it will be for you in the long run. Now, in terms of Fidelity's recommendations, by the time you're 45, they're saying that you should have 4 times your annual salary put aside by that stage. At 50, that figure increases to 6 times, which is quite a big ramp up. But the reason for that is that the earlier you start investing, the better. So you really need to make sure that your pot is building nicely by the time you hit 50, because you're getting closer to retirement. At 55, it goes up to 7 times. At 60, it grows to 8 times your annual salary. And by 67, they're saying that your pension pot and all of your other savings should equate to 10 times your salary. And the reason that they're saying 10 times your salary rather than an actual figure is because everybody's lifestyle is different. And by the time you get to your retirement, you'll be used to the lifestyle that your salary affords you. So that's why you need 10 times your salary. It's not just a flat figure for everybody, because some people spend more than others and others are a lot more frugal. So what's the summary and conclusion today? Well, as I've said throughout this video, one of the main takeaways that I want you to go home with is the earlier you start investing, the better. If you put $1 into your savings account today, it will be worth, on average, more than $1 that you put in a year's time, because you should get some growth on that dollar, and also $1 in a year's time is worth less because of inflation. And I won't go into the details on inflation in this video, but that's one of the reasons why Fidelity want you to have 10 times your salary by the time you retire, because your salary by the time you retire is actually worth less than it is today because of the impact of inflation and higher prices. But what we've talked about in today's video is that in your 20s, if you can save anything, then I think that's a bonus. By the time you hit 30, Fidelity are saying that you should have 1 times your salary saved. I think that's probably a little bit ambitious. Most people don't get to that point because it's hard to save in your 20s. There's a lot of lifestyle changes. You might be starting a family, getting married, all of those sort of things. So it's quite difficult to be able to put a lot of money away. But once you hit your 30s, hopefully you're starting to earn a decent amount of money. You've got a regular income and you can afford to put some aside. And as we've been through on a number of occasions in this video, the more you can put away as early as possible, the better, because that's got a chance to have 20 or 30 or maybe even 40 years growth before you start touching it. And that growth will be the vast majority of your wealth by the time you retire. Now, we've been through the sliding scale of how the amount you need to put aside ramps up as you go through your 30s, 40s, 50s and 60s. And as I said, don't get depressed if you're not there. If you haven't got that sort of money put aside yet, don't start to fret about it. But what you really should be doing is thinking about ways that maybe you could save some money. So maybe cut out your morning coffee. If you drop into Starbucks on your way into the office or wherever you're going, you might be spending $5 on that. If you stop doing that and put that money to one side, that would be $25 a week on a 5-day working week. Now, we looked at an example earlier of how much you would save if you put away $100 a month. And you can see how much that could become just from cutting back on one coffee per day. So maybe you can cut something else out, cut back on some other area of your lifestyle to get to that $400 or $500 per month, which then could be worth millions by the time you retire. So the overall summary of today's video is that it's really good news that you've watched this video, because it means that you're starting to think about what you need to be doing to save for your future. Maybe you're already there, maybe you're watching this thinking, I've actually got a lot more than you've said tucked away, I'm doing very nicely. And if you are, then congratulations. But for the vast majority of us, we're still working on it, we're still building that pot, and the earlier that you start, the better for a future that you will be really happy with. So hopefully you've enjoyed today's video, you found it useful, informative and thought-provoking. If you've liked what I've said, then please give me a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't done so already, because I'm trying to build a series of these videos, so the more people that subscribe, the better. And here's something to put a smile on your face.